Hello, everybody. Welcome. Sorry for the little delay. I'm welcoming you to the press conference from the Pathologic Institute in Reutlingen. My name is Dr. Ute Lange. I am a doctor and surgeon, and today we'll look into two interesting topics concerning COVID-19. The first complex of topics follows the question whether the vaccines have relevant side effects, including deaths, and the second will look into possibly non-declared substances in the vaccines. We have three high-profile experts with us who have intensively looked and worked with this topic. First, I'd like to present Professor Arne Burkhardt, our host today. Professor Dr. Burkhardt has spent many years in working in the universities Hamburg, Bern, and Tübingen, and he looks back to lecture rates in Japan, US, Korea, Sweden, Malaysia, and Turkey. He has been director of the institute in Reutlingen for 18 years, and Professor Burkhardt has published over 150 articles in expert magazines and compilations. He has also certified other pathologic institutes. Our second scientist is Professor Dr. Walter Lang. He has been since 1968 to 85 worked as a pathologist at the Medical University in Hanover, and then he has directed a institute established by him for 15 years with pathologic aspects of many kinds. He did consultation diagnostics for 12 major lung clinics, and from 85 until 2020 he consulted for the lung clinic in Herne. Our third scientist is Professor Dr. Werner Bergholz. He was a professor for electric engineering at the University in Bremen and quality control. Prior to that, he worked 17 years in management chip production with Siemens. In the Ärzteblatt, the Doctor's News magazine, we read of Dr. Schirmer, who reported of 40 postmortems that he did within 14 days after the COVID vaccination. 30 to 40% had died in the context of the COVID vaccination. And this gives rise to a number of questions. Professor Bergholz, is there really a risk by this new type of corona vaccination? Thank you. Of course, every vaccination has a risk. That is undoubted and undisputed. The question is only how high it is. And if you wonder now why someone from quality management is involved here, of course, in vaccination, quality management is a major point, and assessing the risk posed by the disease or by the vaccination. So the question is, do we have a risk or do we have a problem? The answer is very clearly yes, we do have a problem. From 2020, from 2000 to 2020 per year, we had about 40 million vaccinations and about 20 deaths, which were in close time correlation with the vaccination. This year, until July, we have seen 1,230 mortalities. But this year we have already vaccinated 80 to 90 million people with the different COVID vaccines. So if you break that down, we have 20 and 1,200, which is a figure which is much, much bigger, somewhere between 30 and 100, so a lot more. So that's a significant growth. And in addition, this does not only apply for the people who died. In Germany, the report of the Paul-Ehrlich Institute states these 1,230 mortalities. And on the European level, the EMA database, we have over 13,000 mortalities. And as far as I can see, not all of the 1,200 German deaths are there, so there seems to be some delay in the reporting. And we do assume a factor 10 of people who have severe side effects. So factor 10 or 20 more than we normally have with vaccinations. And there must be a reason for this. And I have seen this kind of situation in my professional work many times. And there is a very systematic approach on how to deal with that kind of problem, to analyze it and find a solution for it. And one of these methods is what we're going to talk about later on today. What I'd like to add before I hand over the stage, it is worth to look at the range of the different adverse effects. They are listed on the website of the Paul-Ehrlich Institute, but in a very unclear and non-standardized way. There is a standard way. If you look at the Norway, UK, or EMA websites, there is a standardized list of possible symptoms or organs that may be affected, or bodily functions that may be affected. In any case, the picture is very clear and very similar. There is a differentiation between the mRNA vaccinations and the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And in general, we can say there's no organ that is not affected. There is no bodily function that is not affected as yet. Just to name a few: blindness, deafness, heart attack, stroke, poor or difficult issues with the digestion. Not with everyone, but with many. And there are many, many cases where nothing happens, no doubt. And here we are looking at thousands of cases on the European level that are more or less severe. I think there's there's far beyond 1 million. One figure to finish off with, and before I hand over, which I think is very alarming. Since a couple of weeks, we have been having the recommendation of the Permanent Vaccination Commission in Germany to vaccine the 15 to 70-year-olds. According to the safety reports of the report, there is about 200 severe adverse effect cases and one child that died. A better database is the EMA, with 39 children who died and far beyond 2,000 that are severely affected with adverse effects. And I would think the major part is still healthy. So just to underpin that we have a problem, and now I'd like to hand over to my colleagues here for the analysis of the problem. Professor Burkhardt, please. Yes, first of all, thank you very much for this forum to be set up in order to show the results that we have developed. The two authors here are listed at the top of the list. There were many helpers who did not want to be listed. Corona vaccinations, in inverted commas, the Pandora's box She was the spender, or she was the goddess who kept all the diseases of the world in her box, and this box was then opened by the crazy humans, and since then the diseases have come to the world. I have to make some preliminary remarks. I don't disclaim corona in any way. I don't deny it. But as a pathologist with over 40 years of professional experience, of course, I have a different approach to diseases, which are my daily work, or used to be my daily work. And also, and prior, most of all, infectious diseases. I did postmortems in children that died in a herpes encephalitis. And of course, you wouldn't check everyone for that. I had many, I think more women die of the papilloma virus than die of corona. And there are, in history or over times, there are funny things that occur. In 97, I was told off because I created a panic because I had an 11-year-old girl who had died of influenza, and I wanted to make sure to follow up her contacts, but the colleagues and the press titled me a panicker, and I had to pay for this test from my own pocket, and only that was the Robert Koch Institute at the time when it published Bulletin 8 in 97, where they wrote influenza type B virus triggered. We remember that stem is already being investigated into, and the possible mortalities due to this virus should be done a post-mortem with, and that was at the time where the Robert Koch Institute did a 180-degree turnaround, because for corona deaths, post-mortems were stopped, and for the people who died after the vaccination, it was at least hindered. So I'm not a vaccination denier. My whole family is vaccinated, basically, but I always had a scientific curiosity, and I know that new vaccinations and new diseases create changes in the tissue, and there are examples of changes that haven't been found for decades by the pathologists. For example, the Heliobacter that caused ulcera. And I well remember when I sat in front of my teacher and he showed me these agents he saw in the stomach, and then he said, "Look, this is this is lactobacilla." And then some two Australian researchers in the 80s came around to look at these bacteria, and they found this dangerous agent. So, and this is what happened with HIV, where we had the lymphomas and the Necrotisierung, ulcerous, cancerous diseases. And here the virologists try to stop this, saying, what do the dentists want to do with that illness? It has nothing to do with HIV, but it affects all of us. And what I'll be showing you, there were many things that I've seen for the first time, and some of the things I can't even explain as yet. I'm still looking for names for these, and these are changes which at least some of them nobody has seen before. So I have luckily not had to do all of this alone, because then I would have already been told off as a conspiracy theorist. So we started this with an internal peer review process. I only knew Professor Langen by name before, so we are not a built-up team, but we just met, I think, 3 weeks ago for the first time. 4 weeks, yes. Okay, so in that sense, what I'm presenting today is peer review based, which is something that we read nowadays very often. This is a review and a check of independent colleagues who look at the work that someone does. And I have no financial interests here. I was offered a donation of a couple of €100,000 initially to build up this laboratory, and I was quite happy to hear that in the beginning. But then there were a number of reasons. One of them was my age, to not accept this, and the main reason being that I think if we want to have these results reviewed and built up by a broad basis of many institutes and scientists, that would be more worth it than me doing it alone. So let me move on to the actual topic. The side effects of the corona vaccinations with potential mortality are a lot of to be found in the internet. There is embolic seems diseases to be seen, and we've got the so-called breakthroughs, new infections by corona, and to say that I have not seen any case of that. We did 10 cases of postmortems that were assessed, 8 of them in assessment level 1, which means that we first of all look at what do we find in the organs. Level 2 is that we take biochemistry and electronic microscopes to link this up to the vaccine. I have listed the data here in brief. All of them were elderly patients, 50 years and older. I put the different vaccines here that may be important, when they were died and where the postmortem was made. Most of them in the Forensic Medicine Medical Institute without an extensive histology. I'll come back to that. This is the next batch of cases, a bit in the small print here. 3 of them who were where the postmortem was done in pathology in Austria, and they provided the best specimen. Actually, in the main work, one of my main works was actually to collect the data, because I got the organs and I didn't know whom they had belonged to. And this is cases 8, 9, and 10. Again, 2 from the pathology and 1 from a forensic institute, and some with unknown data as yet concerning the vaccine and what went on. D means Germany and Austria. Were some from Austria. Just a quick overview of the causes of death. I'm a bit difficult with naming a single cause. Death is always a multiple effect, and as when I was still young, I was confronted once with an experienced clinical doctor and gave him one cause of death, and he told me the patient dies, and they're clinically and not on your death certificate. So I did well to remember that we only can say what the cause of death is if we have enough knowledge about the clinical development. I noted where the postmortem was done, the primary diagnosis, and then the conciliar diagnosis. And the most important most important point is listed at the bottom here. It's the question whether there can be a relation established to the vaccine. In this case, it is very probable. Most primary diagnoses, which were very general, so everybody who were about 60 or 50 years old, older than 60, could have a pulmonary fibrosis or a arrhythmogenic heart failure, although probably this was not the case here, but rather a diffuse alveolar damage. The pluses say is a big change. 3 pluses is a very major change, and 1 is a major change. So again, arrhythmogenic heart failure. I don't know how the person who did the postmortem could measure the rhythm of the heart rate. Again, the context is unclear here to our opinion. Let me just underpin this. We came to these conclusions together. Unclear, but possible. Part 3. Pulmonary infarction, heart failure. In our view, the pulmonary infarct is not the sole cause of death, although especially because this is a recanalized. She had this problem before. We had a stand in that vessel, and here another one, lymphocytic myocarditis with 3+, so quite probable. Number 4, multiple organ failure, unclear infection focus. Our finding is spleen, pancreas, and a side effect, leukoplastic vasculitis of the skin. And this is immune complex induced, and that has to do with the immune system. There seems to be a little technical problem with the screen. Okay, the screen is back. So very probable correlation here. Case 5, unclear diagnosis. We couldn't complete our diagnosis completely yet either, but we've seen a perioditis Hashimoto, which is very rare as well, and we can probably establish a connection here, but we need more details. Case 6, cardiac decompensation with heart hypertrophy with an elderly person. That is a normal diagnosis, nothing special, and we found a maximum myocarditis with fibrodestruction, with epicarditis. Of course, here we'll look into that into more detail, and vasculitis in combination with the vaccine, very possible. Case 7, fresh myocard infarct. For us, it's myocarditis. I'll explain why we come to that opinion. And we had lymphatic follicles, pseudo-lymphome, an excessive lymph node, and we had another autoimmune disease, and before this research started, I gave some instruction on how to do the postmortem, and I asked for the salivary gland. And of course, I was called by the colleagues calling me crazy. What is the vaccination going to do there? Well, and the first case, when I got the salivary gland, I find a very rare salivary gland affection. So quite a probable correlation here. And again, not yet completely cleared. Case 8, case 9, fresh thrombosid, mesenteria superior, the stomach arteria, shock. Our diagnosis is a lymphocyte vasculitis, which caused this lack of blood. The thrombus itself was not examined, and we had a lymphocytic leukocytis with a probable connection. And then case 10, a rupture of the aorta ascendens with a heart bag tamponade, and probably coincident, not caused by the vaccination. If we summarize this, the 10 postmortem cases, we have a very probable connection in 5 cases, a probable case connection in 2 cases, unclear is 1. Rather coincidentally is 1, and not yet fully established is 1. These are the major results. Could we see that the screen can stay on, please? The screen seems to be blackening out. Well, if there are questions, we could use the time at this point already, if there are any. Maybe I'd like to note, I'm not of the opinion that I know the biblical truth here. All of our diagnoses done by 2 experienced pathologists are open for scrutinization. We are ready to make this available for everybody else to review this. And as I said, I've seen some changes that I can't even yet put a name on. Okay, so after this was the general statistic introduction of the main diseases and then the rare diseases, and we see what we call a lymphocytic cardioditis, and we see the surface of the heart tissue. We would call this lymphocytic predominance. This is quite typical for virus activities, and here I have to say we are not looking at the virus infection but an affection caused by parts of the virus which have to be in the vaccine. Myocarditis is macroscopically and clinically very difficult to diagnose. Difficult also to see in the post-mortem because it is a small slack than normal, little bit less, but who doesn't have that? Histologically, often misinterpreted as an infarct. Crucial is the infiltration here. With the infarct, we have granulocyte. And this is typically multifocal and therefore difficult to find. So many specimens have to be looked at. And that, of course, has an effect on the capacity of the heart. And people who have a critical weight, which is about 500 grams, if you're above that, every fiber of the heart muscle counts. And it'd be enough if a couple of fibers would be lost by infection. The special problem is a rhythmic heart failure due to the conduction system. That means, like in a car, if you pull the spark plug, the engine goes off, and that is the immediate heart death, or cardiac death, which we see. It is virtually impossible to prove that. My teacher, Professor Dora in Heidelberg, looked at these cases. Then you have to do 15,000 slices of the heart, and an MTA would be covered with a year of work to do that. So very much work, very difficult to do, but it's a Russian roulette. You never know where that myocarditis really was active. If it was in the sign node or in the Ashaftavara node, then that is it. So now I would like to show you what we have here. You're not expert, but I think it's going to be interesting for you as well. In the first round, I overlooked some of the cases of myocarditis, and now I will come up with a number of different images. In the clinical conferences, usually we discuss these things case by case. I am now summarizing the cases. The case will always be noted on each of the images, and I will show the changes of the different postmortems that we saw. In the clinical conferences, I was never allowed to say now in this picture and now in that picture. So that is boring. That's what my teacher told me. So we say here, if we have a bigger amplification, or here in a special coloring, or here in the electron microscope. Still, I'll do that today. I will go for the here and here and here again, because I can give you an infarct from any heart you show me if I want to. So here you see very discrete the muscle fiber, and you see the edema here. The edema, and you see these little dots. These are the lymphocytes, and we're going to look at these in great detail. Very discrete here, so you have to look very closely. I would think 9 out of 10 pathologists, and a few weeks ago I would have been one of the 9, wouldn't have seen this. Amplifying this is an extended vessel and lymphocytes and a few fibroblasts. Again, so these are different cases, as you see in the numbers. Fall is the German word for case here. This is a stronger case, possibly also a starting destruction of the muscle fibers. We see these fibers are not doing well. Again, the lymphocytes visible here, amplifying it again, the edema. And here we see these changes that are very apparent and that have probably been interpreted as infarct by many of the pathologists. These are the multifocal areas with more inflammatory activity spread over. And here we see lymphocytes, no granulocytes. That's the crucial difference. Of course, there's one or the other, but these little black dots that you see everywhere here, if we amplify it, these are the lymphocytes which are crucial to see here. And this is one of the cases, one focus at a very different place, a very similar focus, and there was no coronal occlusion. So this is not due or caused by the vessels, but by a multiple inflammation. Again, here you see the lined up lymphocytes that are squeezing between the muscle fibers. So you see this so-called money roll phenomena. This, in the overview image, we also see, well, the expert will see that the muscles are loose here and spread apart by the lymphocytes. If we increase it, there's a couple of them more. And we don't only find this within the muscle tissue, but we see that in the infiltrate as well, below the epithelium. And lymphocytes don't belong there. Of course, they patrol like the police the whole body, and they are found. You're going to find a lymphocyte in each, not a policeman, so to say. So whenever you do a slice, you'll find that. But if you see these many, that is an inflammation. Again here. Subepicardial fat tissue with the infiltration here as well. And so, by the way, this is cut through a corona arteria, which was in one of the slices. And again here, lymphocytes. So these are the muscle fibers of the vessel wall. And in the bigger amplification, this is an epicate. This is the heart bag showing lymphocyte infiltrates as well. And then these areas of activity. This is the myocarditis, and published on the 14th of August, late consequences of a virus myocarditis. Many die within 10 years. And we don't have a myocarditis caused by virus, but by virus parts. So pathologically, that is, of course, quite a similar risk here. So the second most diagnosis that we found was a diffuse alveolar damage, alveolitis, and there was again many lymphocytes. This is the pneumolar tissue of that alveolar damage. So strong infiltrates here, nearly all of them lymphocytes. Here again, here also looking lumping around a vessel. Here, even a lymph follicle development. I'll show that later. This here is a lymphatic follicle, and this has nothing to do in the lung. I only know that with exogenous diffuse alveolar damages, and we don't have this here. So endogenic diffuse alveolar damage. And the deployra as well, parietal here. You see the many little black dots. So what is this? This is quite surely correlated to the vaccination as a side effect. We're getting to the less frequent diseases, which are not quite well defined yet, but there are strong indications for this. And top of this are autoimmune phenomena, self-attack, reduction of immune capacity, effect on the cancer growth, accelerating cancer growth. I can't comment on that here. The damage to vessels, endothelitis, perivasculitis and erythrocytes. Lumping is what we see right to microthrombs, although we did not find any real microthrombs. But I've seen a phenomena in this context which I haven't known as yet. I've talked about the Hashimoto, for example. Extremely rare diseases. To find these in a collective of 10 patients is very extreme. So now let me move on to the vessel changes, endothelitis. So that is changes in the endothel, which is the inner wall of the vessels. These endothelia are flat. Endothelitis are so flat and thin that you usually don't see them. It's just a thin line. I overlooked it for a while, only after looking for it many, many times. And I've done about 40,000 postmortems, 500,000 biopsies. I first thought this is an autologic artifact. We could discuss that, but you see these thin, long cells, which seem to be free-floating, and I think it's not an autolysis because the enterocytes went there because they couldn't have come after the autolysis. So we see that again and again here, detachment of endo-T cells, and so here we are going to look at that immune histologically. Now I'm just showing this as a special finding that we have to still assess, but we find that in nearly all cases, and that will be very high coincident. This is a bigger vessel affected here. This is a brain tissue with these detached endothelia. And here, finally, images like this, which are difficult to interpret. This is very strange what we see here in that lung vessel, and not only once, but a number of times where we found this. And here, I have to say, honestly, I don't know what we're looking at here, but we're going to do the histologic, and we'll find out. Or do you have any idea? No, I think we'll have to drill down. It's not a nerve, and probably it's a vessel. So now the problem of the erythrocyte lumping, which is what we find a lot about on the internet, and it's kind of put away with, but we noticed this as well, that we had vessels which were homogeneously red. Red is the erythrocytes, and we didn't only find this in one case, but in several cases. Don't worry about the black spots. That's formalin pigment, and this is what it should look like. This is what they should look like in normal vessels, all separated nearly with corona conform distance. Again, another big vessel in the lung. Again, we see the erythrocytes. And another finding is an inflammation of the lung vein, and the spectacular changes. Here we see that the lymphocytes are affected most. This is the vessel wall. Here we see the thromb, the red part, and with the lymphocytes, there's a few granulocytes there as well. This is the heart infarct that we have seen, which was not necessarily lethal. This was the pancreas fibrosis that we've seen. Not much left of it. And again, we see lymphocytic infiltrates. Here, probably in the remainder of a vessel, if we magnify it more, we see these small dots, lymphocytes. And here, probably also a vessel with lymphocytic infiltrates, probably a vessel damage, which led to this vein thrombosis here. We've had more observations made in nearly all organs. And now we'll come to the vasculitis and perivasculitis in the content or the context of the vaccination. It can be found on all organs. If you look closely enough, this is the aorta, and it's not the wall that is affected, but you have a vessel here, and the lymphocytes are around it here. And what do they do on the outside of the aorta? This was a cardiac coronary vessel. And here we have the lymphocytes again. So you see these here. So accompanying perivasculitis. Interesting is this case, leucoclastic vasculitis of the skin, a very, very rare immune phenomenon caused by complex processes. Why the doctor took a biopsy of the stomach skin here of the I don't know why. There must have been something to be seen. I don't think the injection went into the stomach, into the belly. But we have these infiltrates again here with some destruction in the surroundings, with bleeding, and typically, if we magnify it more, the lymphocyte again. And it's typical for the leucoclastic vasculitis of the skin is iron deposition, and this is why it is hyperplasic. I think this was a linguistic problem of a neurologist or an post-mortem doctor mistaking the word. And I thought a lot about what I saw, and I could only see one thing is lymphocyte amok in all organs and all tissue. Overshooting immune reaction, self-to-self attack is the term. Hyperplasia and activating of lymphocytic organs, lymph nodes, spleens, pseudolymphomes, and infiltration and lymphatic leafetal formation and non-lymphocytic organs. So we've mentioned this. And then as a counter balance of we see the depletion, the loss of external immune capacity. So lymphocyte predominant tissue destruction, inflammation is the term here, and it's not the perfect term, with the risk of a prolonged autoimmune reaction. Nobody can say whether and how long it will take to go back to redevelop. And do you see this in many cases? In many cases, this is a lung tissue with a center. So we have this in rheumatic disease of the lupus erythematosus, in exogenous allergic reaction. But where is this to come from? The patients probably were not. There was nothing to observe in the lung. This is another lung. You see it in the different coloring. I think you can learn to see this is a lymph follicle with two sources. So that's power made it here. So these lighter areas here are the sources where the remembering lymphocytes are, which start the immune reaction. Another one here, I'm showing deliberately a number of different cases where we see this. So in the liver, we have this as well. Hepatitis, of course, but here in the very rare in the vessel walls. Also here in the liver, a very, very limited node. So we don't think this is a portal hepatitis. It's a lymph follicle. So the part of a lymph node in the liver. and then inflammatory infiltrates in the kidneys. You see these here. These are the glomeruli. Normally they are inflamed. Here we have lymphocytic infiltrated in the capsular area of the liver. This is a different case, and here again we don't see that in the glomerula but around it. So inter-tissue lymphocytosis, and not the frequent pyrolysis which we often find in elderly people. This is another magnification. You see lymphocytes here collecting in that area, but not affecting the glomerulum. So very glomerular. So very strange things that we see here. I've seen hundred thousands of these, but I've never seen an infiltrate in them, in any of them. This is a novarelcustomia. If you look at the lymphocytic infiltrates again here, so very, very strange. Perirenal adipose tissue with lymphocytes. If we magnify it more, it's better to see. And here, this case 7, which had an extremely overshooting immune reaction. This is a lymph node, and I deliberately put the measure tape to it. It's nearly 4 centimeters, and that is well maintained in its structure. So it's a pseudo lymphome. I have the magnification here. The follicles are okay. Paracortical area is extended where the T cell reaction takes place. Probably this is a hyper activity that we could see here, but 3 centimeter lymph node. If you've got that in your armpit, you will find it by touch. This is the spleen to it. Again here, an activation, the small arterioles and the lymphocytic activities that we see here. And then the contrary to this, the depletion and removal of the stocks, which is what we've seen in HIV patients after initial increase. We have the arteriole here with nothing there. Here's a little follicle. Apart from that, it's nearly empty. And then this Sjögren case with the salivary gland, we overlooked it, both of us, in the first round. So I do not complain to any of the of the people who worked before us on these cases. What you don't know, you can't see. So we see normal salivary gland tissue here, and here you see an area where we only see the tubes and the epithelials and the myoepithelials that press out the gland, the salivary, are empty, so very, very rare. Again, do you agree to that diagnosis? Yes. Excuse me, Professor Bockert, you're talking about the Sjögren syndrome, which is an autoimmune reaction, a disease. Just to make this clear, that we are looking at an immune system that shoots completely self-to-self attacking, and the inflammation is taking place in every organ, in every vessel, ovariole, uterus, everywhere, and in the kidneys, and this leads to strong autoimmune reaction and diseases. And you can see this here, as we've just seen this in the salivary gland with the Sjögren syndrome. We don't know if that is self-limiting, which we hope it is, but we do see this. Of course, you can argue saying one patient has had their Hashimoto and the other had their Sjögren, but in a collective of 10, that would be very extreme. These are diseases, I would say, 1 to 100,000 normally. Let's move on to the one individual case, which is very interesting, though, which is contamination adjuvantia in the vaccination, foreign bodies. Wild speculations are going on. Microchips, graphene oxide, minerals, metals, aluminium, alloys are often used in vaccines to boost aluminium compounds, which is what we've seen, and to boost the immune reaction. And in Japan, they found stainless steel particles in Moderna batches that were produced in Spain. And I actually miss the reaction in Germany. I'm quite sure that these vaccines have been delivered to Germany as well. Apparently, the Japanese seem to be more finicky here. The company argued, what's the point? Just a few stainless steel particles in the body, no problem. Stainless steel is often used in medicines and heart valves and prostheses. It's no matter. Okay, don't worry. No point. I'm just waiting for someone to stand in front of a judge in court saying, I can't have killed that person. My knife was a stainless steel knife. That is medically allowed, having stainless steel in the body. So no reaction. And I'll show you how we found this. You know, the images. What we did was that we looked at the vaccines of different producers. By the way, this goes back to a physician working in Hamburg. I think Mr. Reiser is his name, Stefan Reiser, who pointed this out. And we picked this up here in Reutlingen, and he did that in the light-through microscope. And I wondered, foreign bodies is double light-breaking elements, is not biologic. May be wrong sometimes, but in this case, I think it holds true. So we found these box-type elements. We found these needle or string-like elements. Such crazy things here. This was drastically named by one of our staff, female staff. And here and here, we find that in many places in different ways. I expect stainless steel is not double light breaking, but at the edges we will probably see this. And we've got nice images here, however, not very nice if you have that inside your body. So that was case one. Microemboli of foreign bodies, intravital. Obviously, we know this phenomena from bone marrow emboli after fractures. If bone marrow gets into the tissue, it is moved to the lung. The lung is the smallest part of the blood flow, and then it clots there. And so this is what it looks like, and I think we can see in the overview already that we have these giant cells here. We call them as foreign body giant cells. They come from the phagocytes, and this is here we see this as well. I took a couple of pictures here to show you that I didn't just find a single incident. This was a lady, by the way. She had no exposed profession, and she was over 80, and this is not something, or this is something that is only days, maybe weeks old. I think here it's good to see the giant cells, which in this case have been described by Paul Langkamps first in the University of Bern. And one person once said, well, if I look at his microscope at the times, he could only see these cells because everything else was too small. And this is what it looks like. And you see the gaps here. This is a little kind of brown material on the edge. Most of it, probably the metal has been diluted. Here as well, this brown material across the cell. Here as well. And it goes on. I could show you hundreds of these cells, and it's a very, very surprising, great stuff to see. Problematic. Again here, another giant cell. Here are lymphocytes, not granulocytes around it. And here, again, the diluted, and I couldn't stop looking at this. And this is what it looks like in the double breaking light microscope. You don't have to worry about the many little dots. This is formalin pigment. But here you see that this particle here has a very clear definition of an edge. And I don't think stainless steel is not double light breaking, but at the edges it is. And here you see the giant cell with the many cores to it. And let me stick with this. How does this get there? Have you looked at how the vaccines are done in these mass vaccinations? People get there, they just get the shot, literally, if you looked at, they never aspire. They just jam it in and push the jab. And then, of course, easily you can hit a vessel. And I'm convinced here the vaccine was injected directly into a vessel. Whether the woman died of this is a different question, but it surely didn't help her to live longer. I don't have the whole history. I don't know how much we have, but it's massive in the slices that I have. And a colleague from Sigmarin pointed this out to me. He said he looked at these films. There is advertising films and reports and all of this, how they do it. They drive by in the cars, and he checked it. They were never aspired. He never knew whether they hit a vessel or not. That leaves me speechless. So that's vaccination have to be done by doctors and not by somehow trained people. Well, that's the WHO has cancelled the requirement to aspire. So anybody can do it now. Well, I learned that you do that. The muscle is full of vessels. Well, you wonder what is being changed. The RKI changed how postmortems are done, by the way. Anyway, it takes me to the summary. If we look at the side effects with possible mortalities, and the death certificate is worthless statistically. I've done necropsies for 40 years, and I can tell you, nobody's interested. And especially, I always did the secondary necropsy for the cremation, and no doctor is going to raise a red flag here. And the relatives are concerned, and that is why they don't voice out, why don't speak out. If the relatives have someone who died, they would be involved in the case. They sent them there. I got this from one case, and I looked at all the files, and all the files. It never said when and where and with what the vaccination was done. And so I thought maybe I got the wrong documentation. Not even in the post-mortem it was mentioned. And then I called the husband of the lady, And he told me, well, his wife probably hasn't told him. And she also didn't mention in the hospital that she was vaccinated. After she died, she found the invitation to the second vaccination in her handbag after she had died, and that is why he concludes that she was vaccinated. So there are these cases, and the people doing the statistics have to acknowledge this, who say we don't miss anything. We miss about 90%, I would say. So without a histology, it is applying the wrong medicine, a wrong approach. Of course, everybody does their trade, and it's okay. And we have had bad experience in asking for it and asking for postmortems. I only started with this because the relatives were refused to ask for that. So no postmortems, or many postmortems, are not done, and those that are done, these new patterns that we had to find and develop first are missing. And the summary is there has to be a cross pathologic research, including histology across different medical disciplines, the so-called Heidelberg model. I could quote Professor Schirmer here, who works it in this way and who works thoroughly there. And the figure that he gave us, we've mentioned this here, he is of the opinion that 30 to 40% of the mortalities in temporal context with the vaccination are caused by the vaccination. So now, coming to the last images of the resume, I deliberately didn't want to say anything politically, but I couldn't resist. I can't resist anymore to quote a legal person. If you don't want to get vaccinated, you have to bear the consequences. Well, this is what a legal person said. I would never throw my hat out that far, but my resume is, if you do want to get vaccinated, you also have to live with the consequences. It is our task to inform, and I've tried to make this clear here, to inform about risks and side effects, and following a quote of Bush, that this is done with good ratio. This is what the pathologists are for there, and not the school teacher, who is usually ready for that. And that takes me to the end. Thank you very much, and I'm open to questions. Maybe one comment. You said that you had to look at the specific patterns for these causes of deaths, and probably caused, or highly likely to be caused, by the vaccination. I think this is a very crucial finding, which you will probably make available to your colleagues. Yes. Per case, we had about 20 to 25 slices. I pre-screened them for 6 hours for each case, and together we looked at these for 2.5 hours per case, and then I took about 6 hours to digitize the photographs. And when doing that, and when digitizing them and take the pictures out, we see more even than we've seen before. So the Suchen syndrome, I only noticed that when I scanned the glandular, this gland. So it's very elaborate. I overlooked the first myocarditis, and also I thought, well, that's an infarct. But when we looked in more detail and analyzed the cells, and I think that's important to say this is the first step that we've taken. The second step must be now to do the immune histology and do everything that the pathologics stock has in store. That has to be let go on these things now, so that we can really prove the connection that this has to do with parts of the viral agent. You could all say what you show could be all coincidence, of course, but if we look at the immune histology and we've got the observations there, and we see it's only T lymphocytes, and we see that a spike protein is X-primed, then we can surely say this. But we didn't want to wait too long. That will surely take half a year until all of that has been observed and clarified. I would like to add a comment. I'll be brief. One pathologist is rarely alone. That's an old saying in our profession. And in that sense, it was very good that we were able to look at these samples together. We also had a very competent third person with us looking and rechecking the findings, because together we see more and we correct each other. We had no combined interest here. We work independent of each other. Everybody brings in their knowledge, no more, no less, and their experience. We have found a lot, and we have looked at the lymphocyte aspect here. Apparently, these play a major role in the immune system and in the reaction to a genetic vaccine. Both of these theses have to be proven. We can see the phenomena, but we have to go in more detail, do more examinations to see what type of lymphocyte do we have, and then we can see, does that correspond, what we see, does that correspond to what the toxicity of the spike proteins do? Is that an identical image? That will be very important. We're going to have mass spectrometers to prove the spikes as such. If they are not provable, then we have to take a different approach, and then we can only calculate the probabilities. I hope that we'll get there soon, but these are things that will need a certain amount of time, and time looking at the acute problems is what we don't have. So I think in the face of these things, we'll have to take these preliminary results and publish these in order to maybe inform a number of people. Time is scarce. We're running out of time, simply. I'd have a question on myocarditis, which played a major role. And I've heard that young people are especially affected, or could be especially affected, especially sportsmen. Many sportsmen have reported this to me, that their perception was that about a week to 2 weeks after the vaccination, there was a drop in performance. They were tired, they felt fatigued, and especially sportsmen and young people can be affected. What is your view on that? Well, in young people, it is probably a problem of the conductive system, and the problem is, and that's the question is how many muscle fibers are damaged, and they don't rebuild. So if you lose them with 20, you have them lost for the rest of your life. And if you still do high performance sports, these muscle fibers are missing. they're not going to come back. Okay, thank you very much for that great work and that detailed presentation. We'll have a short break now, and then we'll be back with more microscope images, dark field images to drill down and bring more light into the dark. Thank you very much so far. So, good evening, welcome back. We are now into the second round with more interesting topics concerning the vaccinations and possible adverse effects. First, I'd like to welcome again Professor Bolkart and thank you for the presentation that you've just held, giving us good information and showing us how important pathology is and how much we can learn from it in order to avoid risks connected to vaccinations and avoid deaths. Also now in the second round with us is Viviane Fischer from the Corona Investigative Committee. Most of her know her. She's a lawyer. We have next to her Holger Fischer, also an attorney looking into the topic of what may be found in vaccines which shouldn't be there. And he will also look into the question in how far these substances pose a risk. And on his left we have Dr. Uta Langer. She is a surgeon, if I am well informed, and she looked at the blood counts and she will comment on them later. And I'm also happy to have Dr. Bolland here on the screen with us online. I think we too are connected by a very important question which I stumbled upon, and life is not coincidence only. 2 weeks ago I was called by 2 doctors who asked me, well, it can't be a coincidence. I am a doctor, and for 3-4 years I have been working with cancer patients. And she gave me an example which I'd like to share here anonymously. The lady, 70 years old, had breast cancer, and this breast cancer was well under control and it didn't grow anymore. I have to note here that with elderly people, cancer does not grow as quick, as fast as with younger people. Now the lady was vaccinated, and the colleague told me after 6 weeks, this tumor, this breast cancer started to grow again. In the end, it had to be undergo surgery after 6 months because it had exploded. It had a starting size of 111 in the 3 dimensions. After about 3 months, it was 1414. And when it was removed after 6 months, so you see how telescoped things are here, it was 161616. So with me, that raised the question, can it be that this is in the context of the vaccination? And could it be that in the question discussed in the literature of now by immune suppression plays a role? I would like to look at this question with Dr. Bolland, and maybe you could explain to us what you have found in blood examinations and how you could explain certain possible contexts and correlations correlated to what I would call turbo cancer. Of course, medically not quite correct, but impressive and clear. So maybe you could just give us your view on that. Yes. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation. I have brought a couple of images which I would like to share to start with. Acupuncture and vaccination are the titles here. I have just given a presentation last week on these topics, natural healing and acupuncture. I am a general practitioner, but my special area is natural medicine. I work with plants. I work with healing earth, homeopathy. I'm a Bade doctor. I've been this for 39 years, and this is why I have a completely different idea of what medicine is about, and this is why I ask different questions as well. So I got these pictures here, for example, a couple of weeks ago. On the out left, in the dark field microscope, you see the red blood cells, which is the blood of a healthy person. You would see that moving as it is in dark light microscopy. It would be changed, moving, and here the next picture is 4 hours after the vaccination of the same person. And when I saw this, I got my own microscope down from the attic and checked it. And if it goes on, you see the right-hand picture, which is about a week later, and you see the gold, the money roll developing, phenomena developing, and that has been confirmed in many cases around the world. I've got images that are 6 weeks old now. I can't document, unfortunately, because my practice is not suitable for that, but the characteristics of these pictures are enough for me to see, and I show this to every patient who is vaccinated or who wants to be vaccinated, and I just tell them and allow them to decide what they think. I could only recommend to do that, but I can't recommend anyone to do anything, but this is something that you should bear in mind when you consider it. This is the mRNA that is to be brought into the cell, and for that we need additives, and the vaccination is what we see here. We have to question whether it's a manipulation of the human genes. I think vaccination is called something different, and the 39 years that I've been working in this field, I have seen lots of vaccination damage. I could treat after flu vaccinations, for example. I don't know if I can do this here as well. We are still assessing how this could be done. One thing is early aging with many people. We see lack of concentration. We see things that we can't see. How are we going to capture this scientifically? I always say I'm non-scientific. I work with the human being, with the human individual, and that's my approach. We see changes in characteristics of the people, and we see new diseases that haven't been around before, as we've just seen with the pathologists before. So we have the mRNA components. Whether they are included or not, I don't know. I've just collected it here, and if you look at these, you will see that they can cause cancer. And so just by the additives, it may be possible that certain diseases, including cancers, are triggered or re-triggered. And we also don't know, as we've said before, there is inflammation, there's combination effects. And what is the goal of all of this? If we look at the content of the vaccines, of course, the spike proteins, mRNA, and graphene oxide, I've seen pictures of that, of groups, people from Spain. I don't question this, whatever. I'm happy to be called, what do we say? What would you call them? Conspiracy theorists, yes. I have also indication that there's mini robots in the blood. The earliest time I heard of this was in '95 in a presentation that people from someone who was an expert. So I always say the people who are into this vaccination are 30 years ahead. Thousands of scientists must have worked on this. So, but what are the consequences now for the immune system, which we are looking at? These are the pictures that I've been doing for a number of weeks. I asked the people who have been vaccinated twice to get blood samples, and we've developed a standard with this picture here, and we look at the dedimers, we look at the thrombocytes, we look at other factors and the liver factors as well. And it's interesting. We see here how unbalanced the immune system is. And I just like to reduce this to two pictures because here many people in the audience are not doctors. But this is so clear and obvious that the pictures that I show you are of two people who feel absolutely healthy. And this is one of the pictures. I just talked to this person today. The inflammatory value is at 31, the CBC. He says, why am I sick? And this is where you see it. And if you look at the T cells, the B cells, and the natural killer cells, the K cells, something is wrong. Something is out of hand. And the question is now, how can I assess this damage? And as I work with live people and not with dead people, it's important for me. Dr. Bolland, actually today we would like to show how the blood count changes and what we see in the vaccination. I think the way how to treat this should be addressed in a different session. Yes, let me just finish with these two pictures. I'm not a scientist, so this is the second one. And again, here we see a young 20-year-old patient, 21-year-old patient. After the vaccination, she's got a COVID arm. That means paralysis in the arm. And she feels, well, no problem. And what we see here is the fatigue and the general fatigue that people feel. And the question is here concerning mitochondriopathy. So it's difficult to prove, of course, and the question is, what can we do? I think it can only be seen in acute cases and in therapy. If we start therapy, which takes effect rebuilding the mitochondria, then we have a chance. The lymphocytes in the tissue may be a consequence. The heart attacks, maybe the infarcts can be a signal. So then it's difficult to see, and then it's difficult to see in the heart once the people are done the postmortem. Dr. Bolland, maybe we could now look at what Dr. Langer has seen. We have got analyses and photos of the content of the vaccines. Maybe we could jump into that. Maybe you could present that, and we could later turn back to your points of view, just to illustrate what we are actually at here. Could you just briefly explain what these images are? You're speaking for different people. This is a residual vaccine, BioNTech Pfizer. Very impressive what we see here. It is moving. It looks like something that is produced in the dark field microscope on the sample carrier on the slide. So we have one at the bottom, one at the top, and that holds the specimen, and nothing moves normally. And here we see the structure moving through the whole of the image. In a different batch of BioNTech, we found this, which looks like, well, Could be a chip. Unfortunately, we haven't seen the first picture yet, or did I miss it? I couldn't see it. This is Dr. Bolland speaking. Well, probably you have to release the screen. I think it was visible for the audience, and it was just not in the Zoom. Okay. If Mr. Bolland wants to see it, we have to share our screen. Maybe, meanwhile, I can comment that this structure has been reported from other areas. I think it's going to be part of that presentation as well. We found that from Gitara, the same structure. So it does repeat from in that BioNTech vaccine. Okay. Can you see the image now, Dr. Bolland? We can't hear anymore. I can hear. Okay, so this was a batch, BioNTech batch. What else do you see in the background? There's lots of movement going on. So BioNTech is moving. You see that? That could be the vaccine particles, the nanolipids. Can you say how big this object is? Well, up to 40 mu. Yeah. We have found up to 0.5 millimeter sized particles. And they are visible in the light microscope from Professor Burkhardt, by the way. Again, the chip, and this is the same vaccine in the normal light microscope in the hardened. It's the same object 3 months later. The one that was floating, the bigger one. Now that it is this one here. It was here and dried out. It forms this shape here. Here we have Johnson & Johnson, a massive object as well. Again, here showing these structures with sharp edges, well-defined edges. So maybe a question to the experts: what happens if this moves into the capillary vessels? In the lymph node, it's moved to the lymph node. Well, it's very big. For the small capillary vessels, it's very big. If I can say this, we know nanoparticles, they are eaten by macrophages, which is what they can do if they have sharp edges. We know that from polystyrenes and graphene oxide. And we get a so-called of bio-corona around the edges that mRNA and proteins wrap it up, and that makes the body makes it unharmful for the body. But it is an inflammatory process that happens around these nanoparticles. There's good research on that. This again, Johnson & Johnson, with this little aeroplane-like structure moving. We've seen this plane in many samples, and it always has this shape, so it's not coincidental that it has the shape. We have seen it often. The small part at the top is moving as well. This is something that we also see. This is blood of a vaccinated person. We see the money roll phenomena here, and this is not a hair, it's not contamination. We have taken a piece of cloth material. It looked like graphene layers. It's very, very long, and it's double light shedding. Double light shedding, what does that mean? It means it's a foreign body. Maybe the pathologist could explain. It's non-organic. So it's nothing biologic that should be inside the body. If you look, could this be Morgellons? Morgellon. I've seen images shortly after this. It looked like graphene layers. I can't say whether it's Morgellons. Also, these structures have been observed a number of times by different people, always in the blood of vaccinated people and only after the vaccination. This is a smear of one of my patients who had a left-sided paralysis after the vaccination, who has MS relapses, who has autoimmune antibodies, cerebral. And this image was 6 months after the vaccination. We see these metal splinters dancing and the blood. This pineapple shape is not live anymore. The only thing that still moves is these parts, and the white bit is a granulocyte which tries to catch this contamination, and apparently it can't do so. We have one at the top and on the right of that granulocyte as well. So now we've got pictures that I didn't take. This is Bärbel Gitaler's image. Miss Gitaler sent us the latest images that she sent. We again have these strings. This is 600-fold magnitude after a BioNTech vaccination. After BioNTech vaccination, contaminations in the blood. Again, here visible the lumping of the red erythrocytes. And now everything much smaller around it. This is done by Mrs. Helena Kren. She is a practitioner. Again, new structures, something that connects. Again, these string-like structures in the blood, and the erythrocytes look quite well in this. And again, a different magnitude. Again, these long-shaped structures. We don't know what this is. Interesting here, this one has a nearly rectangular shape. Show the film if you can, if it's here. Here we have BioNTech, as it's listed at the bottom. Can we have that enlarge? This is BioNTech. So we took a residue of the vaccine and tried to deliver that cooled, and if we put that under a microscope, it warms up and becomes very active. This live vaccine is something that I heard several reports of, is only provided by BioNTech. Moderna is a problem. Usually it is not available as a residual. But again, we have this bar here that we saw in the first image, we've got this structure here, and we see liquid vaccine with particles that move. If you had AstraZeneca, it was very still, no contamination, none of these movements. This is Janssen. Again here a drop. In this drop we have this lump here of particles corresponding to what we've seen from Dr. Lange's images before. Here is again. It's a bit difficult to see. It's difficult to focus on a single droplet of specimen. Here we also see some of these flying objects, difficult to see as well. The interesting point here is, and I may say this is again Combinati, BioNTech, you don't need a special microscope for this. You could do that with a bit of luck in a simple light microscope. You see a lot of it in it. And the question is that we wonder about, but that will take us to the legal issue. Why does the Paul-Ehrlich Institute doesn't see this? Probably because they only look at what they call appearance. And that means if there's nothing big in it, if you look at it with the naked eye, it's enough. And if you look into a bit more detail, it would be possible to see this, because everybody could see this. Everyone can see these contaminations again and again and again, and not just as we've just had with Moderna and Japan recently. So then it dries out, it doesn't move as much, and then when it is dried, these crystalline structures develop. In this case, this was Johnson & Johnson. Of course, nobody knows what these white dots are. It's an aesthetic image. Others would know what this means. We have authorities, we have federal institutes for that. They should explain. In the middle of the image, we see one of these triangular plane-shaped, like airplane-shaped structures. They are not very frequent, but they are present. Shall we continue? Well, that's it. Maybe you could ask Dr. Muck, who worked with a group in Canton in Austria, and you found similar images. Can you hear us? We'll have to switch channels. Yes, I can hear you. We're just... So, first of all, good evening. My name is Maria Mukmanok, and I work in a scientist group in Austria with a number of teams of analysts, general practitioners, internists, and a molecular biologist. And we've looked at different specimens of the vaccine in Graz, one group, and one group in Canton, which I form part of, to do analyses, and I pleased to represent this and present what we have found in AstraZeneca and BioNTech Pfizer. I've prepared a couple of video sequences where I would like to highlight some of the substances. We have also prepared the offer and like to do that. To reproduce this can be done at any time. We've done that with a number of different batches of the vaccines, and the results have always been reproducible. And we'd be happy if a camera team would come along to accompany us here to see that residual vaccine with an intact cooling chain right down to the slide, and then we can look at what we've seen here. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, sorry for that, but I hope you will be able to follow if I share my screen and look at the different folders. I think it's quite clear. Let me start with a couple of images from BioNTech Pfizer. I'll comment on what we are seeing. I hope you can see. Here we see a snow flurry, really. You have to enlarge your screen. Okay. I can see the full screen. I've shared my screen. She has to swap screens. Just share all screens if possible. Just a minute. Just trying to open the right menu here. I was able to do this before. Just a second. You still see the small screens, don't you? Yes. Okay, now this is it, yes. So here we see BioNTech Pfizer. That's the overview. I can say right now in BioNTech Pfizer we have seen movement. The vaccine is put on in droplets, and these structures, as we're seeing here, appear. This is metallic structures. I think you see my mouse as well. We see these specific, small, call it chips without wanting to define what a chip may be. We have these Y-type structures as well. And here again, as we've seen before in the observations, metallic structures, we'd have to decide what that is. And this ring is what we saw here. Also, again, a kind of chip-like structure and a bigger metal type of structure, something that is very pointed and sharp. We've seen that again and again in the different specimen, and there's a very good video for this. I'd like to show you that. And here in the overview, I'd like to take AstraZeneca's vaccine. Now very recent, 15th of September, we see very interesting, very tidily arranged structures. I'll see that also in a minute. These are chains that build up. If you look at that, the very bright rim is the rim of the slide, by the way. So this is a part of the microscope. When these chains here, that's a 40-fold magnitude, and here this is a 1,000-fold magnitude, where we have very impressive, tidy, chain-like structures. And we see here that this is nicely arranged. We can't really say what this is, but it surely is important to analyze this in more detail. And I can report that we have worldwide colleagues. We're an international network where we look at these things regularly, sharing findings. And many researchers have found this worldwide. These small parts, it is, of course, questionable what this is. We don't know what we're looking at here. If we have people experienced in microscopic work, they say sometimes this could look like a parasite, but this is just the pure vaccine. So I don't want to go too far in interpreting here, but I just want to show and present what we saw in the analysis. Let me move on to the video sequences, especially for people who have never seen this before, can see what we see under the microscope here. So we see a lot of movement, we see a lot of life here. We've had this part in the photos. Let me just scroll forward a bit, and again here the same structure. I've got a couple of more here. We see this very sharp-edged metal-like structures everywhere. And we have also got a video which I'd like to highlight some of the parts, so don't be scared by the time. The whole sequence is 13 minutes. I just picked up on a couple of parts. Let me just go to the time code here in 3 minutes. If you look at this, which will be moving into the picture, you've seen that when I was at 3 minutes 40. Here we are, a very big structure which is kind of transparent on the inside with a well-defined edge. We don't know what it is, and it again has these sharp-edged plates here, and the dynamics in it very, very impressive. I'll move forward a bit. Imagine this is in a single droplet of vaccine, and so the audience may be astonished. We are not shocked anymore. We've seen this many times, but of course it is the question of what we are looking at here. I'll try to go forward to the next section I'd like to show. Again here, again and again, these structures that do appear. So it's full of incredibly a lot of stuff, material. These structures, of course, difficult to describe in the way this moves. This is a massive part here, which needs further investigation, quite clearly. And moving forward still, again, similar structures to be observed. And you really can't get enough of it. Again and again and again, we find these things in our analyses, these sharp-edged plates, different kinds of structures. And coming to the next one, very interesting as well. It looks like the night sky with these metal type structures, Y-shaped structures, again, that we noted. Again, nobody knows what this is supposed to be, but it is there. This is what we see when we look at it in the microscope, under the microscope. And this is a very interesting shot here. Just again, this is the rim of the slide, and this is the slide without the vaccine, and inside it's the vaccine, and this is here the vaccine inside the container on the slide. When we have found this structure, this looks like a little SIM card of a cell phone, and we looked at it and moved a magnet towards this, closely. We couldn't find any reaction, this part here, to a magnet that we held close to it. It's very interesting to see what this looks like. Again, this very well-defined structures and this transparency of the object. Very, very interesting. So very, very amazing. And of course, the question is, what is this and what does that have to do in a so-called vaccine, an experimental medical drug? We'd like to have answers to that. Very, very impressive. And I could carry on for hours like this. And there is more and more pictures that I have. So I think it is important to summarize here this snow flurry. Really, all of this is very amazing. And I think amazing because we have had lots of residual vaccines, most of them AstraZeneca, BioNTech, Pfizer, that we looked at, and I think it is very important that we still carry on with these analyses. And I can really say there's a great number of colleagues. I'll be in another phone call tonight with people from 35 groups of doctors where we will be discussing these things, addressing these topics and other international projects. So we're not saying as a group we can't define what this is, but we hope that we'll find worldwide people who are watching this who have possibilities to analyze this in more detail and have access to it, because it's very important to really define what we are looking at here. And we are happy to present and share our findings at any times. It is reproducible. It has been reproduced many times already, and we are happy to do so again. A brief question. We have found results from laboratory examinations, and we've searched for the graphene oxide, graphene. Maybe that could be differentiated. That destructs of many things, but what we found, lots of heavy metals and suspicions for heavy metals. So as we are in this high-profile medical people here, what does that mean if I find particles that contain chromium? What does it mean if I find nickel? What can that do in the body? Chromium and nickel were two substances that were found again and again, and I can certify these laboratories really do exist. We are doing preliminary studies. And I can say these have been proving a number of times. We've got international findings on this that are being shared. So what does chromium need? What does nickel mean in the body? What does it mean in the bloodstream? What is what's going on? Are there any views? We have to add iron. Iron, yes, iron turns up always. Fe chrome forms steel. But I'd leave the word to the experts. Well, I have a question first. It's the question of dosage. Of course, without having a precise doses, we can't say what effect it'll have on the body. Nickel, we know it may trigger allergic reactions, but I think that's not the major point here. My question to the group, first of all, will be massive, great pictures, unbelievable, extremely shocking. Did you look at other medical liquids as countersamples and found similar phenomena? Well, the first question, yes. We also looked at traditional vaccines in June. I have no images of these, but that, of course, would be reproducible. We looked at the FSME vaccine, and there was no vaccine, no vividness in it. But what we did see, we know that in FSME there is aluminium, and we found the aluminium particles. We've looked at flu vaccines for adults. We looked for hepatitis B vaccines, and we've just found the protein structures, but in none of the traditional vaccines. And that's interesting to see that live in a camera. We didn't find any of these particles. So FMSE, flu vaccines, and we did a nasal vaccine, a live vaccine from the International Pharmacy, which had to be still mixed. It was a powder, and here we didn't find anything in the with the pure measles vaccine. SMSE, as I said, hepatitis B, nothing special in this context. So these sharp-edged structures that look anorganic, or rather technologically, were not there. Yes, in the ones that we've talked about, and the small extra information that I have, we've had the nasal vaccine for a child, and we analyzed that as well, and that was the only one where we found these sharp edges. And our molecular biologist said, who worked in vaccination development for until 10 years ago, she said it does make sense to have a mechanical damage here if we want to apply the vaccine through the nose. So we want to definitely look at this under the microscope. Were there samples where you didn't find these phenomena? So in the batches, are there differences where you say you don't see this at all? Well, in the batches that we have examined so far, that was mainly in June, and now since end of August, we started to look at things. We always found something in the latest batches. Germany can confirm this. I can confirm this for Germany. And another interesting question, the experiment with the magnet is extremely interesting. Did you try to look at these vaccines in a radio wave-free chamber? Of course, this is hypothetical. Maybe that these movements are triggered by microwave impacts. The point is that there are colleagues who work with measuring devices from construction, building construction, measuring imitating fields, and they could find this even in dead people, so there can't be any mistake with heart activities measured in the EKGs, and the currents measured were too high. So there's a phenomena that should be looked into in more detail as well. Extremely interesting. I don't find any studies to this as yet, and the colleagues also report that with unvaccinated people who have the same field as a piece of wood or a tree, with which is nothing. Could there be a context here? Did you look at this at radio waves, whether they have any effect? Well, I can say that I am in contact with a very good building biologist, and I'd like to do that. I have myself a very high electric magnetic field meter, very good one, very sensitive. I have this because I was interested in radiation, smart meter radiation, and so on. This is why I have this at home. I looked at this prior to the pandemic, and of course it would be very interesting to look at this and hold it close to different frequencies. and look at possible reactions of the vaccines. And it would also be very interesting to look at the vaccine without any radiation. For example, when we have shielded boxes or rooms or foils, so maybe we could do that to see whether the movement is still in. That would be a very interesting experiment maybe to conduct. Yes, could surely be done with that construction building biologist. We could go into more detail in that and plan a series of experiments. Dr. Dichter, you are a surgeon, really. Maybe you could briefly share what you have found in live people in terms of damages or special observations, where we have presented this case in the corona meeting, 65, I think it was, 56, with a fulminant thrombosis, with a loss of the big part of the intestine. I think at the time, I didn't know the biodistribution study from BioNTech, which came from Japan, that they have published this long after it has been vaccinated many times here, which is scandal and such. And then we read that 16% of the doses is delivered to the liver. So that is the organ most affected. And in the spleen, we see very high concentrations of doses, which has a certain causality with the complication. And then we had more proof. We can look at that session meeting of the Corona Investigative Committee. I have not had much contact with other wards, but I've talked to other hospitals, and I don't want to speak as for my employer here, but I hear this embolies, thromboses in many cases. The colleagues who report to me are the exception. Just as Professor Burkhardt has said, the vaccination, the point in time of the vaccination is not asked to find a causality. There is lots of criticism. There's no active reporting, and it is not looked into to find any correlation with possible vaccinations. But the colleagues who do look into this say that this is about 20% of their work to treat vaccination damages. I can't verify these figures, but it's quite a lot. With the mesenteric vein thrombosis, I can say I have a colleague from general surgery in the emergency admission, and she sees a significant increase of this normally very rare disease. And I can only see the people who are in emergency paramedic services that see this and report to the people, report to the staff there. This young man is vaccinated, and if they look up on it, the report is not done. So I can say this is a massive amount of this, and it's known that from a Austrian child hospital, as per August, 4 children who were brought to the hospital as inpatients after the vaccination. I positively know that only one of these cases was reported. That's a scandal. I know that in the hospitals around here, in the emergency admissions, it's not allowed to ask for the vaccination. So that is not allowed. It's not allowed to ask this question. Well, I think as far as I have heard, and as I said, I'm not talking as an employee of my employer, but what I see as a private person, as a doctor, it is known that the IMF status is asked for, because otherwise the patient would not be admitted to the clinic. Otherwise, they would have to be tested. So it is question whether they are vaccinated or not, but it is not considered in the diagnosis. And that this may be a cause here for the condition of the patient. Well, that is really very notable, what we've seen here, the images, the structures that we find in it, and the effects, also what Professor Burkhardt has presented. These massive changes that we see of this very strange liquids here, and what can be seen visually here seems to be very different from normal comparable vaccines or vaccines with immunization effect preparates. So I think that, well, how we say this, it's really, we should think of what is the consequence of this. And I think the main consequence is a massive information campaign that we have to send out to the world, that this has to be looked in great detail. With these substances, we are in a black box as far as the efficacy, effects and the ingredients are concerned. And one thing is clear, the governments of this world, and of course the scientific community, have to do whatever they can do. And there is a number of aspects to approach this. I think postmortems have to be massively increased in numbers. I think everybody who dies after the vaccination in a time window that has to be defined as yet, and it needs to be quite big, because we can't say if it's 2 weeks, 6 weeks, or maybe even 3 weeks, half a year after the vaccination, where things may emerge. So that must be massively increased. And also in the Corona Committee, we had this idea that registered must be assessed that are already there. There's an IWF register for fertility clinics on how the fertility rates are. And we've just heard anecdotally of one doctor who talked with us. She pointed out that in her patients, she could see that concretely that the fertility rate has dropped, I think, from 23 to 7%. That could be coincidental, but that is a question that should be looked into. I think we have to look at these IWF registered, and we have to look at the cancer rates to see if there is more growth, especially with respect to the cancer that Mr. Becker referred to. And there are more approaches that one could look in. I think you had an idea of the university in Aachen that they want to do a registration. Yes, this is something that is well to be copied, and this is what we want to move into. It's an inevitable demand, ethically and in juridical ways, that this is researched into. We can't accept that many live patients are not systematically examined with respect to their IMF damages, and the same applies to the pathology. And I follow the claims made here, and this is not an accusation to the forensic institutes and the pathologists. It's a dynamic scientific process with constant growth in findings. And you have just said in your presentation very nicely, at first look, I overlooked it. That is scientific ways of work, that we stay curious and that we go into this process ethically, scientifically, juridically, inevitable. And another message. The whole thing is starting to slow down. We are apparently not getting the 90% of vaccinated people, and the government says we take all worries off you. It's not from nowhere that people don't want to be vaccinated, and if they had the promised benefit, people would do it. And so if the concerns that they have, which the government does not remove, I don't understand this. Then, as a lawyer, I have a question, and if this question is not answered, I have a suspicion. Although it's not a general suspicion, it starts me to initiate a search. And then, in the matrix, we want to take over what we looked at in the University of Aachen in the COVID survey, that this is established across Germany, and there's a lot of indications, and the Oviedo correlation, that it is a fundamental humane right, as we're moving towards children now, that this must be looked into very carefully, that the turnover of the burden of proof, which is strange. I sit here and I have to give proof, although the legal situation is quite clear, proving or leaving the burden of proof to the producer. A medical drug has to be as harmless as a piece of food, the liver sausage. And if the monitor people come in and find anything in a sausage that doesn't belong there, it has to be taken off the market immediately, and this needs to be applied here. So this is important that we have a look at this, especially in the highlight of the next 4 years after the upcoming election. And I hope that politics can take a stop here and follow these demands. There's no reason against this ethically by the government of law, and scientifically it is important and very important. Maybe we should say this or make this claim here and this request, but I know reality. We are moving into this project now to look at this phenomena of the tobo cancer, which is not proven yet, but where we have to move into an observation study now. Scientifically, I've been coached by a university who will accompany this. We have a research design and we're carrying on, but I wish that is not going to be us alone, but the institutions that have much more competency. And I don't accept it that the government stays at rest and does not get active. You wanted to extend this. Yes, of course, the state, the government is in the obligation to do that, especially Paul-Ehrlich Institute. And the producers as well have the major part of the responsibility. In all other cases, when a product is questionable or harmful to the customers, and we are the customers here, then the first line, the producer is the first in line to explain what's going on, and we can't let them drop out of that obligation. And also, if there is liabilities excluded, which we have seen in the lead contracts so far, of course, if the production process is problematic or there are non-declared substances, of course, it has to be juridically tested. If there is a way to get this company to regress, it can't be possible that they exclude themselves from liability by and not and putting things or substances in the materials that are not declared. That will not be able, not enable the government to take the responsibility. And there's more to come. We have the problem that people need to be informed, and only then we can exclude any physical harm by the vaccination, which is an intrusion in the body that can only be done by informed consent on an informed basis. And this is the case of these aspects that seem to be emerging here, especially the findings of Professor Burkhardt. The people have to be informed that there are these suspicions. And if that is not the case here, again, we need to have intensive access to the respective vaccinating doctor. There is questions coming up and question marks whether the consent is really informed, and there's more question marks added now, and the many funny things that we see in the vaccines, these have to be massively addressed. I demand that the European test protocols, that is the standards to which these vaccines are tested, are adapted. Here we have to make sure that these, or have to see that these are not sufficient, and that I don't only look at the appearance, whatever that is supposed to be, that I have to look in detail with a microscope, and that has to be a standard in inspection, examination, batch examination, as the Paul-Ehrlich Institute has hidden the information on his web page, that way can rely that a different European institute examined it, and it's enough for Germany. If it was done in another country, it's a scandal. Maybe they have to ramp up their testing, but with adapted testing standards. And I can only recommend everybody to look at these guidelines that they work by. And if someone says it is enough, then that is simply wrong. That's the first thing. The producers have to be followed up, and they have to be found faulty, and you have to want to do that if you want to do so. And the question is, if we see this, why don't they? And if the guidelines are not adapted, then I have to assume that nobody is interested in this on behalf of the Paul-Ehrlich Institute to find out what's going on with the producers, and the consequences of that will need to be looked at as well. Overall, we have to say, as colleague Becker said, we do not have to have the burden of proof. We informed you, and you, as the institution responsible, have to look at that. And if you look at lemonade, in the worth a cent, with this type of contamination, will be off the market immediately. And here we still have this on the market, and I expect this to be clarified tomorrow or at latest next week. And I'd like to comment on Dr. Bolland as well. Earlier on, we looked at the lymphocyte and immune defense, which is problematic and damaged. And we had the didymers and the lymphocyte were a major point here, that we differentiate the lymphocytes. I've heard this a couple of times now, that with the vaccinated people, we have an immune reaction which looks in HIV patients or cancer patients which are under chemo treatment. And that has to be part of the informed consent. If people die of heart attacks or strokes or have these, we have to say there is per BMP, so I can find a weakness of their heart, and then the doctors have to know that they have to help their patients after vaccination. They have to find the blood on the didymers, and this is part of the standard of vaccinating doctor, which is means to get hold of them. If I think I have to do that, I have to say, look, I give you all diagnosis as possible, because I know later, at least after this evening with this video now, we have the suspicion, we have the hints that things are going on, and here the doctors are responsible, of course, including our government. Thank you. Well, we have to ask the question why this is not enough. Still, that we've got this material, that we have to approach the Paul-Ehrlich Institute and force them to look at the findings. If this is reproducible, then people have to see it there. I don't know if they do look at it. So you can look at the pictures, at the images of the standardized cell inspections, examinations that we've done, low lymphocytes, B lymphocytes too low. That is clear. And the laboratory doesn't say it's a vaccination damage that caused it. We have to check it. It's a virus reaction, HIV, whatever it may be. We have chemo, radiation therapy. This is the question that the laboratories ask if they see the observation that I've just seen. But if you know that this is not the case, they were not under chemo, but the vaccination is the only possible cause, then the vaccination should stop and people should get around and say so. I don't think there's much need, no more research to be done. You just have to request this vaccinations to be taken off the market, and the approval, the emergency approval has to be stopped and revoked. And it's not enough now with the adults. It's moving to the 11-year-old, and then it's going to go down until the 6-month-olds. And this is a crime. What we've seen here, what I've presented in our group, this is not rocket science. It's a simple microscope. Everybody can reduce this anytime. So we offer this. You can't see these things in the vaccines, not see them in traditional vaccines, and then BioNTech, Pfizer, they vaccinate the children. And you know that I'm one of the initiators of Show Our Face. We are an initiative of doctors, lawyers who say, please, you can't allow to have the children that have no high risk of severe COVID disease and conditions. We can't vaccinate. And just imagine, I am asked in the public TV, I hear a lawyer there saying, and immediately as a doctor, I have to clarify this to stop this fear narrative that people now want to vaccinate their children and even their toddlers. This is something unimaginable. This is pure madness, and this madness must be stopped immediately. And I can only say, please, you have to inform the people. All this point why this narrative of the vaccination holds up the Delta variant is that people don't know of the truth that there are working COVID-19 therapies. We know that this emergency use authorization is only possible on the condition that there is no approved COVID-19 therapy. And this is perverse in the original sense of the word, which is upside down. It's absolutely perverted here. Everybody who is ill has to go to early and strong therapy, and then people would not even be fearful of that and be subjected to that experimental vaccine. And it really disgusts me. I'm a mother of a 3-year-old child, and if I see child doctors in the public TV now say on the public news that now the 6-year-old month's babies have to be vaccinated, that is madness, and we have to stop this. And we are working on the World Humanity Forum and the World Health Forum with the World Health Forum 21.com. That will be online 2 weeks' time. And we want to connect medical staff and lawyers and change the game. It's very clear in the view of the problems that we see here with the vaccine. We see a an issue that is a case of civil protection, protecting the people, protecting the population by the government, really, who needs to do this. If we have the protective approach, if we want to assume that in the corona constellation, this is very moving towards this, it is unclear and not understandable if we see concrete damage now shown by postmortems that there is no activity taken to inform the population and do all that. And of course, here we have the great risk. It is very far developed. It's unpleasant questions that have to be asked. And it may be happening, maybe looking at a politically motivated forward now. Especially in the face of the upcoming elections in Germany, I think you have to really think carefully whom to elect. There are parties in opposition to the current politics and who are going to voice this when in Parliament quite clearly and push these things forward, and one of the parties is the Basis, the German Grassroots Party. I'd like to make this point here. Mr. Fischer and I am here in this party, and I think it's the right way to make sure that things change politically now, and we can't carry on, and we can't do with the whole population being at risk as what we're seeing here now. Maybe I can add that the audience that may have switched on now saying that we just want to look at the vaccines here. We have to look at the question whether it is absolutely necessary to really vaccine everyone, including the 6-month-old children. All this is based on the hypothesis of the asymptomatic transfer, so that everybody who bears the virus can transmit it. And we have a study from Wuhan with 10 million people, and out of these 300 cases were found of asymptomatic transfer. 300 out of 10 million. So that is something, and they had a high CT value, so you have to wonder that. And another study was conducted in Germany, in Duisburg, with 160,000 cases. So we have two studies, a Chinese one and a German one. And here we find 0.4% of the tested were asymptomatic cases. And here the medium CT value was 28. We see everything that is above 25 is not relevant. So on this basis of the asymptomatic transfer, the whole world population is forced into this to protect a vulnerable group, because the children don't protect themselves, and the vaccination is not effective to stop the spread of the virus. As we see another Chinese study, 255 times higher risk of breakthroughs of people vaccinated with the Delta variant. So that shows everybody who has went to school knows that this is no protection, and it's no surprise that the Delta variant is very strongly present in the throat of the people who are vaccinated, and so we do not have any protection. The transfer rate is not reduced. We have no high load on the intensive care beds. That was one of the first arguments. We have even reduced the number of intensive care beds by 9,000 in Germany. And so Professor Ioannidis have proven a couple of times that this is no asymptomatic transfer. And Professor Eges as well from the Eges, who is someone who is pro-vaccination, says that 80% of the corona assigned diseases and cases are not corona. They didn't die die because of corona. Corona tests in these cases are often 5 weeks and more ago, and so this is just used to increase the figures. And this is from someone who actually is pro-vaccination, and we have to take this background and ask whether it is necessary to vaccinate people, young people. And then we have a biological concept that also is applicable here, where we are trying out and injecting a medical drug for the first time into the cell of the human history, and the so-called transfection is tested for the first time here with human beings, and I strongly doubt, and those who invented the technology also doubt this, whether this is done on a voluntary basis by the cells. No, and we see that the vaccine is fought back by the cells, so there's an urgent biological question to be asked here. And the mRNA, if it were, which would immediately dissolve, it weren't capsulated in the lipid envelope. Who of BioNTech Pfizer can tell us if it is actually the lipids are dissolved, and how long that program that changes our cells to produce these spikes, how long that program will run and when it will stop. That would be very important if we look at the adverse effects that we see here. And the question is also if BioNTech Pfizer thought about the question on how to get this out of the body. I doubt that they thought about this. So there's a lot of biological questions that have to be answered here. And the last question for me is the mRNA has to be read out in the cell, so there'll be wrong copies made, and that may lead to not to immunization because there may be wrong readings of the code. This may even imitate a new virus and lead to autoimmune conditions, and by that way even lead to the destructive cancer growth. Thank you very much for listening. And then if we see that in the IMA database we have an ongoing research saying that the real world data looking at the effect of the people, also with pregnant women, and if we also hear that the STIKO, for political reason, now tends to recommend the vaccination for children and even then for infants, then this raises massive juridical, political, and scientific questions, and I think this is something that has to be addressed politically. Okay, so I think I would like to make an appeal still, which is raised many times. There's proceedings at the International Court in Den Haag, which has not been stopped. There is, they are looking for witnesses of critical doctors. I've heard 20% of cases of damages caused by vaccinations. Medical doctors here being able to witness in English, and then other proceedings had to be filed, because one thing is clear: whoever carries on with this, with the knowledge as of today, is legally punishable. They can't say that they did this deliberately, or at least partly deliberately, and this is a crime against humanity, which is called deletion of human beings, and the parties are deleting their electorate here. So I would say that even if we say ICC takes long, and we can support this prior to the election. It's not a political question, but we can say that from tomorrow on, Den Haag has to investigate. Proceedings are filed, and we need witnesses, not on the damage of vaccination in 10 years' time, but the patients that come here to the practitioners, people saying, I am sick after the vaccination. We have 2 proceedings, and we should take up on the initiative of Carsten Reusing, of the initiative coming in from England. We could clearly say that our governments and the members of it and others, Polarity Institute, are punishable, and they won't get away with it. That is the point tonight. As what we do, the images, the pathology Dr. Burkhardt made, we have presented the findings, and I think this should really support it. Many people don't know how sick they are. Most do not know yet. They haven't found out. Many people may be finding out tonight to get help for their own therapy. We are not here to show and clarify the crimes, and not only to see why people died, but we want to help people. We want to develop therapies. We want to save what can be saved, also for those who are already vaccinated. Thank you. I think that was very important to go into diagnosis now early on. People may having problems, may having a little headache, which is not the normal headache after the vaccination. Check the dedimers to address this, and really do this constellation of the civil protection to handle the danger that we may be running into. It's important for every individual to take care for their own safety and see what problem they may have in order to take counteractions if necessary. So, in that sense, thank you very much for watching. This video will be translated into different languages, and we'll share it so that other people in other countries can have it: Italian, English, Spanish, and we'll have it translated so that people can be informed of the situation in Germany. Thank you very much.